Okay, this video is basically a summation of where we are today and where we're going. The future of IamKoine.org. It's led to Koine Life, that is the young men behind Koine.org. IamKoine, that is. They developed that. It's Flummox free. It teaches young people, especially this scholastic youth we have today, who even in their high schools, their subject matters are so advanced that to challenge them to perceive life in a unity as defined or expressed and demonstrated in the scriptures is really not that difficult. That is, they don't find the need for a flummox. They are not that impressed with the contradictions that seem to be perhaps fading away. Similar to, for example, it was sometimes people would give our young people the impression that Calvinism, a fallible religious construct, and Arminianism, a fallible religious construct, or Molinism, a philosophical fallible construct, were somehow you just had to choose what was handed to you. But because of the willingness to evaluate, we've demonstrated that the difference between Calvinism and the Scripture, which Christians teach that the Scriptures alone are the only certain infallible rule of faith and the only means of saving knowledge. So if the Bible alone stands alone, is unique as the only infallible book, it alone then is infallible. What's everything else? Well, without evaluation, we can almost clergy has a brand loyalty that they have to sign onto, and they have to support that brand. They then take these fallible constructs and give those to their laity. They call them their laity. And that's similar today to, there's pastors and his congregation, and sometimes pastors sign off on to or buy into fallible constructs. It leads to a flummox indeed, but sometimes it appears to be the only energy their religious organization has. That is, they've not been called out, they've not severed their ties, they've been invited into the contradiction. But something that really helps is, you want to learn how to evaluate things. This book's about 1,400 pages long. It's a really good resource. It teaches us, that is, if you want to approach this professionally. And my first motivation was, what was the psychology behind this constant flummox? You come out, you think you're coming out from, let's say, a Catholic or Protestant or Judaic or Islamic or occultic or New Age order or whatever those things are. And then you find yourself in these micro flummoxes. This book is 2006, so it's rather new. But for example, here at IamKoine.org, we don't share the flummox between old and young earth. And we evaluated that and determined that the only fact we were glad to present was that a term, Hayah, the Hebrew term, Strong's number 1961, was indeed absolutely irrefutably become. And that's because it was translated in the Koine text, the inspired Koine New Testament. The translation of that word is a term genomai, which always means come to be. So that was gathering data for us. We didn't see it as, whose side are you on, and well, now we have to be biased because we're for an old earth, so we have to say become, or we've been influenced now to the young earth position, which are two vague and ambiguous terms indeed. We found as early as 1994, this was a dilemma in a theology book. Again, that's just data for us who are free to evaluate things and happy. In this theology book, for example, he questioned the translation of become as alternative, doubt-filled. That was easy to evaluate. If you're free to evaluate and you don't have a cleric's dilemma where how do I support my denominated doctrine? And then we learned about free will. We defined it from the Bible. What does it mean? And without using the word free. And we learned that the Bible teaches that God is causal. He's a causal person. He caused a deep sleep to come upon Adam. Genesis 15:6. Abram caused himself to believe. Now, why that was troubling to people of the Flummox, the clerics and the laity, is because that's similar. That's their brand. Their free will and sovereignty dilemma is the only thing they have for fuel. And then their reciprocal ridicule, the fallible constructs are the fuel of ridicule. So our young people don't need that, don't want it. They didn't attend school. They don't study calculus to argue with people who didn't. We don't study the Bible. We don't evaluate fallible religious constructs in order that we might argue with people who don't even know how. You may not even know people. My Hebrew book, grammar, was not this nice modern book, and I never had anything like this. I received this years later. But it's all data for us who are free to evaluate. So Flummox 1, the young and old earth, we addressed it. It was really not that difficult. It wasn't easy because it was easy. It's just we didn't have to deal with all the emotional charges. I was in school at a time where it was called the gap fact. And then I saw it become gap fiction. Again, those are the extremes. It's called hyper dissonance. Gap fact says nothing about which gap theory to which a person might be speaking. The only fact we have is that Yah is come to be. So we can then study. There is a war in heaven. War is on the earth. The conflict between good and evil. That's very basic, simple things. But it's not basic and simple when people can't improve their knowledge because their side can't afford the information. And when bloodshed has occurred over something called free will, and I was trained by people who said, come out from those religious orders, where now you're free to define free will from the Bible and find out that man is a causal agent. We're free. We address the dilemma between Calvinism and Arminianism, the faulty dilemma that's based upon the inability to reconcile two fallible religious constructs. What difference would it make if they cooperated or not? They're designed to be antithetical. One is thesis, one's antithesis, and the Bible is synthesis. The Bible was already together and placed together correctly. So when we learn that Calvinism denies believe, point of action before the new birth, and Arminianism does not attribute the continuation of believing to the new birth, we notice that on neither hand was the acknowledgement of the kind of language, kind of action in koine. So ignoring the translation in the New Testament of the Old Testament word Yah, or being unaware of it, and then no definition of free will, and then not distinguishing believe from believing, it has sustained these battles, if you will, these constant, and then questions like, are you a synergist or a monergist? A deliberate, complex question designed to perpetuate the contradiction. The Bible doesn't speak of a monergist or a synergist. It speaks of monergist, one worker, God, and the purpose of his work was in order that we might believe. So there's a monergist and a believer. So people just aren't trained. Clerics, even pastors, can get absorbed in that world of the clergy, where they begin to be so brand loyal that they're blinded that the text is not in a flummox. The Bible wasn't written, they're poorly formatted. Eschatology, we demonstrated that there really never was such a thing as a partition between the time the book of Revelation was written, for example. It did not then draw a line there and say all that is in the past, or it's only relevant to the present time in which it was written. There's no such thing as it only being what's occurred in history. There's no such thing as it only being futurist, and there's no such thing as only spirit. Those are the same deliberate, intentional partisanship maneuvers that sustain, and it's willfully, deliberately, but the people caught up in it are blinded by it. The spider builds the web deliberately and intentionally, but those of us who walk into it, we don't see it coming. We also demonstrated that by omitting the adverb simultaneously from the letter in Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, the 17th verse, then it doesn't appear very definitive that the resurrection, the rapture, the seize away, will be seized away simultaneously, and it has a preposition together with them, that is, we, the living ones, the ones remaining around. So we saw that in root cause analysis, which is done in things not nearly as important as studying the Bible, and I was taught a course called Bible analysis. So that word resonated with me because I was always in a business world, large responsibilities where analysis was critical, because you could lead to someone being injured or great cost in operations that would jeopardize people's job security and the future of the company. So with that in mind, analysis, root cause analysis, we found out that what's the reason for all of these pre, mid, post, pre-wrath fallible constructs? Well, you go back and you find out that if you just remove that adverb, it allows the addition of variables, the introduction to variables into something that was once constant. So it's been kind of remarkable, especially when we demonstrated that it's baptismal regeneration is not a possibility. It's not even a debatable discussion. We demonstrated that when you omit or have missing elements. But whatever's causing all of this to take place today, we've learned at I Am Koine, and as I taught the young people, and especially now the grown men that are there that have been raised upwardly, we've been discipled and we've come out from all of it. There's a lot of freedom we now have, because we wanted to know what was the root cause, similar to there was an axe laid at the root, and John the Baptist was speaking of everything's ready. Now the man who will come and fell these trees will take that axe, and when he's done, there will be no such thing as Pharisee or Sadducee, as we're told today. If you talk to some Christians and you say you have to be a Catholic or a Protestant, we will tell you it's only because of our knowledge of the Bible we don't have to be. When someone says you have to be Calvinist or Arminian, we can tell them, and do tell them, that because of our knowledge of the Bible we don't have to be. And when someone says you have to be pre or post tribulation, we can then tell them by our knowledge of the Bible we do not have to be. Because it's such a remarkable thing to meet people who say they aren't Catholic, neither are they Protestant, and then to find someone even more remarkable to say that they're not Calvinist nor Arminian, which is really rare, because we have been mocked. My sons, one in the faith and two in my flesh, those three young men that I've raised upwardly at our church who serve on our staff and have great responsibilities, and all the deacons there that I've trained and taught, they've been accused of so many accusations now that the people who are accusing them are now switching sides. It's been a joy, because the knowledge has sustained us. And now where we're going next is to continue to improve our evaluative approach, and the level of expertise that we've acquired in evaluation is unsurpassed. This is just one textbook, in the degree of which I'm most thankful, and for which I will learn much. But now we're producing a hermeneutic book, Hermeneutics for Commoners. It's based on the process that was through experience. I was exposed to it through experience, but now we have it where we can quantify it. A lot of people in my life aspired to train men to be able to write, to think critically, and that's what's coming out of all of this. My son, one of them, 31-year-old, he's multi-degreed and has knowledge of computers. He's the techno mind behind I Am Koine. He's not really impressed with the emotional outrages or raging outwardly that he sees of people. He wouldn't be shaken with someone who has to fabricate a cause, fabricate alarm, and hypercharge something emotionally to cause someone to have value for it. He has more respect for knowledge of the Bible, the bigger things that we do, our outreach, reaching people who are actually in darkness, in ignorance, or deceived. We still believe that taking that light into their world and giving it to that life is the real actual. The rest of it seems to be a dead preoccupation, a static, just, if you go from gap fact to gap fiction, if you go from, well, we were once Calvinists, now we're Arminians, to, well, we're one part of this and two part of that, you can tell there's no professional evaluation taking place. And I say professional in the good word. I have no idea why people who claim to not be clergy would have a problem with the word professional, but for the fact that they somehow in practice are more clergy than pastoral. But as Bible teachers, as teachers and men who have been taught and provoked to pursue education, we don't walk away from Christian psychology. Matter of fact, William James is actually the founder of what we know today as psychology, and he was certainly not an atheist. So those who don't know any better act that way and talk that way and speak that way. So we engage the field of psychology professionally. We engage the systemic approaches, learn how to evaluate, and we don't shy away from it. We take the old Hebrew grammars and the new grammars and collect all the data and then produce results. Now, what does that do for heretics? That is, those who codepend upon a school of thought and fight to sustain it in order that the dissonance and that disagreement and that frictive element that sustains the flesh and its combative nature. We don't know. We aren't responsible for the flummox that people have bought into. Because if you live by the letter, you'll die by the letter. If you fly by the flummox, you will crash by the flummox. So I've written a paper using Walty and O'Connor, this book, and when I was in graduate school, showing that according to them, the vowel pointings indicated a verb was stative. And then I read Hebrew grammars, and then I went and found that the answer was always there in the text. And then I went and saw the huge flummox over free will and sovereignty, and noticed that in sovereignty, these people who have these different camps never care to disclose the fact that God is mentioned as one who desires things and determines things. And so he doesn't determine all things, and he doesn't desire. Everything's not just desire. So they didn't want to distinguish that, because if distinguishing it between those two very different words in the Koine text, then there's no flummox, there's no argument. For example, open and closed theism, we demonstrated that by omitting living theism, the chief character trait of God, the living God, Adam was a living soul. Then you have you just have categorical terms that are quite insufficient to reflect the true content of the scriptures. And with that, then you have a flummox. It can never be reconciled, they can never be synthesized, because they are not genuinely the thesis nor the antithesis. They are incorrect thesis and incomplete or incorrect antithesis, and there can never be a synthesis. So if that's too much for people, people say, I just don't want to talk about all that stuff. Really, the problem is it's so simple, it's scandalous. The problem is that it's jeopardizing a lot of people who have an overly invested interest in either brick and mortar that they can now not support, or into the things they most adamantly affirmed and yet have never demonstrated the character to evaluate it, to then honestly disclose it for their audience. So they've set something in motion that has now come to be something very large. And we were taught and warned, be careful what you set in motion. And one of our more engineering type instructors, science-based, said that you can leave the earth in a trajectory and be off just a few degrees, and the farther you go, the farther off course you are. And then in our hermeneutics class, we were taught about the last being first, the first will be last, learning that those who started something centuries and centuries and centuries ago that will come to fruition, and at the last, they'll be judged for what became and came from what they set in motion. And you think, oh, how horrible that must be for people who started, let's say, occultic orders today that are now in the millions and millions of people. And when they started, it was just a few people and a few clumsy plagiarized documents that have now been reproduced to where multitudes of humanity have been swept away into it. Well, that's why we were cautious. You want to evaluate before you advocate. And the Bible says that a spiritual person will evaluate all things from the Spirit of God. And the psychical man, which is similar to our adjective psychotic man, will not receive the things from the Spirit of God, and you certainly won't evaluate them. So if you're struggling with, why am I always in a flummox, why am I going down this road, and as soon as I get there, oh no, it's another contradiction, it doesn't align with the Scriptures, I can't seem to come back. And yes, you will find friends out there. I become something different every day and don't even know about it, because people who taught me one thing have already moved on to another thing. Now that's good news if you're a professional, because it's feedback. And as a commoner, we want the feedback. It's the breakfast of champions, and we definitely want the data, and that's why we make it available to everyone else. So enjoy this imcorne.org apologetics and outreach website. We have Corne Theological Institute, which is a Bible society. It's for contributions. If you have data input, if you want to, let's say, demonstrate a flummox that you've been able to work through, you want to add information to the conversation, or you want to participate in the conversation. That's what it's about. It's a free society, open to everyone, and that's what this website's been so far. And we've not found anyone ever to date. So what's unique about this approach is that it shows how many blind spots are out there with people who have some of the most scholastic level of degrees in education in the world, but that does not immunize any of us from blind spots. If we don't evaluate, or you've been taught wherever you go to school that now just here's what we use the Bible to support. The Bible is not proof text and is not to be used to support our constructs. Rather, we're called to support the Bible. So that's enough. That's a good explanation and a good line that we've drawn, put a peg down to let everyone know where we've come and where we're going. And we have 5 books online under the tab Corne Commodities. We have the Corne Confession, the Case for Corne, the Case for Corne Apologetics, Calvinism and Evaluation, and Hypergrace, His Perfective Realities. Actually, what does the Bible say about the grace of God and the hypergrace? So those are all available PDF, free. Just download that. Review any videos you want, and please, all your feedback's great for us. If our love for the truth warrants what it is, I suppose we would take some things personally, but we haven't found it possible to care. We've let the person vent, let them make an outlandish remark, and then we'd give them the feedback, show them what they've omitted, and no one has debunked anything that the Scripture said. We didn't believe anyone could. We always believed the Bible was the highest level of the most divinely inspired. It's the perfect construct, and it was constructed by the perfect Creator who formed it and fashioned it perfectly. So that's enough right there. Enjoy this summation, but start asking yourself, if you don't have skills in evaluation, why have you not pursued that? If you're in a situation, in an environment that's so biased, just know that that's not unusual. Make sure you do well in the coursework. Make sure you learn your grammar, learn your syntax, become as literate as possible, and become a writer, a good communicator. And then the Scriptures won't disappoint you, because once you evaluate those correctly, the outcome will be as what we've learned at imcorne.org, completely irrefutable. No Calvinist on the planet exists that can refute what we have demonstrated the text to actually say. No Arminian exists on this planet as we know it that can refute what we've demonstrated the text to actually say. No Molinist can cause us to prefer that philosophy, as accurate and as well developed as it is through reasonable faith, Dr. William Lane Craig. And yes, I love watching, listening, learning, reading, and have books from him. But whatever that is, it's not a substitute, nor does he recommend it for one from the Bible. So we haven't found anyone Judaic who can refute what we've demonstrated the Hebrew text to actually say. So that kind of confidence, that kind of feedback really verifies the power of evaluation, and it shows that when we can remove our biases, the scriptures are prevalent, unsurpassed, and absolutely perfect. So have a good day and enjoy evaluating the Bible.